Congratulations on making your 2023 fantasy football playoffs. And now, are you looking for a streamer, a sleeper, or a boom play? Well, stay right here for RotoBallers Week 15, Week 1 of your fantasy playoffs. Streamers, sleepers, and boom plays. I'm your host, Anthony Aniano. Happy to be with you here today as we look at those players who give you a little bit extra edge. Maybe you're on the fence about starting them, or maybe there's somebody who is in a smash spot and you want to take advantage of that for Week 1 of your fantasy football playoffs. We'll start at the quarterback position. Los Angeles Rams quarterback Matthew Stafford going up against the Washington Commanders. Now, Stafford's been on a roll. His last 3 games, 25 or more fantasy points with 10 passing touchdowns against a defense that allows more points to quarterbacks than any other team in the league, the Washington Commanders. They allow 266 passing yards per game. They allow 25.7 points per game to the quarterback position. Like I said, the most points in the league, and they've allowed 30 passing touchdowns this season. Again, the most passing touchdowns allowed in the league. Over there on the season, the Washington Commanders are allowing 30.4 points per game, and over their last 3 games, allowing over 40 points per game. This is a smash spot for the Rams, and I like Matthew Stafford this week as a boom play. Now, if you're looking to go a little deeper at the quarterback position, take a look at Joe Flacco. My hand is forced due to injury and benchings to utilize him in an FFPC 2 quarterback format. Joe Flacco of the Cleveland Browns against the Chicago Bears. In 2 starts, Week 13 against the Rams, 20.7 fantasy points. In Week 14 against the Jaguars, 27.5 fantasy points. And he's going against the Bears defense that allows 231 passing yards per game, 20.1 points per game to the quarterback position, and a very high 23 passing touchdowns this season. That's the number I'm looking to take advantage of, are the passing touchdowns the Bears defense allows by using Joe Flacco. Now, at the running back position, my first running back, Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers against the Indianapolis Colts. Now, Jaylen Warren has only been averaging about 6 plus yards per carry each of the last 2 games. Now, hasn't gotten more work. It's been Najee Harris a little more than Jaylen Warren. But going against the Colts right now, Colts allow 131.5 rushing yards per game and 27.1 points per game in a PPR format. They've allowed 14 rushing touchdowns and 2 receiving touchdowns to running backs this season. Now, where Jaylen Warren catches my eye is what has happened with the Colts run defense over the last 3 games. Over those last 3 games, 5 running backs have finished with 13 or more fantasy points. And in the last 2 games, each of their opponents have had 2 running backs go over 13 fantasy points. 2 weeks ago, Derrick Henry and Tajee Spears both had nice games. Last week, it was Joe Mixon and Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. The Colts' run defense is porous enough that multiple running backs are putting up fantasy points against them. Could be the same thing with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. Now, my second running back, not a sleeper, not a streamer, but he is a boom play for Week 15, and that's Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 7 straight games with 10 or more fantasy points, but only 1 game of 20 or more. He's had 4 touchdowns over those last 7 games. But he goes against a Packer defense that's allowing 141.8 rushing yards per game. You saw Saquon Barkley get in the end zone twice last week. They've allowed 12 rushing touchdowns this season and 23.7 PPR points per game to opposing running backs. Rachaad White has a chance to break that streak and go back over those 20 fantasy points. Since Week 10, 6 running backs have scored 10 or more fantasy points against that Packer run defense. Now, at the wide receiver position, Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks against the Philadelphia Eagles. You know, that Philadelphia Eagle defense that allows the most points in the league to opposing wide receivers. 47.1 points per game to be exact. They've allowed 23 of the 29 passing touchdowns the Philadelphia Eagles defense has allowed. 23 of them have gone to the wide receivers. And in the last 3 games alone, this is an astounding fact. In the last 3 games alone, 7 different wide receivers have scored 13 or more fantasy points, including such big names as Michael Gallup. So there is no doubt that DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith-Njigba can all feast against this Philadelphia Eagles secondary. Jackson Smith-Njigba, 18 targets in his last 2 games. He's not a fringe player. He's a focal point of that offense. That Jackson Smith-Njigba in a smash spot against the Philadelphia Eagles. Up also at wide receiver, Odell Beckham Jr. against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Odell Beckham Jr. had 10 targets last week, a season high. 22 targets in his last 3 games, and 4 out of his last 5 games with 10 or more fantasy points. They go against the Jaguars team that allows 38.5 fantasy points per game in a PPR format to the wide receiver position, and 15 of the 22 passing touchdowns allowed by the Jaguars has gone to opposing wide receivers. And finally, my sleeper streamer at the tight end position, I'm going to mispronounce it and I apologize, Chigoziem Okonkwo of the Tennessee Titans. I can't say it, but I used him in my FSGA format last week as I qualified for the number 1 seed. He's become a reliable target for Will Levis over the last 3 weeks with 17 targets. That's almost 6 targets per game for Okonkwo, with 8.5 fantasy points in each of those 3 games. This week, he goes against the Houston Texans, who allow the 3rd most points per game in the PPR format to opposing tight ends at 15.1 fantasy points per game, with 4 touchdowns allowed to the tight end position. On average, Houston allows 6.8 receptions, let's round it to 7, and 64.5, let's round it to 65 yards per game to opposing tight ends. So right there, you're sitting at about 13 fantasy points for Okonkwo. So it's a good matchup with a safe floor for a guy who's been getting targeted of late by his rookie quarterback, Will Levis. So, to recap, my Week 15 fantasy season playoff Week 1 sleepers, streamers, and boom plays. Quarterbacks, Matthew Stafford as a boom, Joe Flacco as a stream. Running backs, Jalen Warren and Rachaad White. Wide receivers, Jackson Smith-Njigba and Odell Beckham Jr. And the tight end, apologies for the mispronunciation, Chigoziem Okonkwo of the Tennessee Titans. Folks, head over to RotoBaller.com right now. Sign up using the promo code HOLIDAY and save 30% on any of our premium passes. Football, basketball, preparing for baseball. Save 30% off any of the premium passes between now and New Year's. It's our New Year's Spectacular. Like and subscribe right here to the RotoBaller YouTube channel. Download the RotoBaller app. It's free. All the sports you want right there in the palm of your hand, whether you play season-long or DFS formats. Give me a follow on Twitter at @Aniano Fantasy. Good luck in your playoffs, and we'll see you next time right here on RotoBaller Radio.